Hi, I'm Aaron Raw, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
It's something on an important issue, and you have two, I think, very good spokesmen on the issue. They're very articulate, educated. They're great communicators. Both of them are. And I felt like I think I had watched it a long time ago, but it brought back some of the arguments. I've heard Craig speak on this issue several times, and so some of it I might be conflating with other things. But I thought it was good. I know Jim has some things he threw out that would be good conversation starters. Bill, do you want to talk about next month before we get into
Oh, absolutely. This is one of my favorite people. He's a Christian apologist, and he has a podcast. When I was looking at his, oh, by the way, I'll pass this around. Take two if you want to give to a friend or whatever, but this is going to be the book by Justin Riley, who does the podcast Unbelievable out of London, England. Maybe you can get on and get a free trip to London. Yeah. I didn't.
Any excuse to go back to
But the title of the book is Why, After 10 Years of Talking with Atheists, I'm Still a Christian. So I really admire this guy. When I've seen him interview Bart, Ehrman, and one of the best ones is one of the recent ones. He interviewed Sean Carroll, and an Australian guy that wrote a book on fine-tuning, and who's a cosmologist. But the level of that debate is just incredible, and they were extremely nice to each other. But he goes out of his way to be fair to the atheists, just bends over backwards to be fair. Kind of like Jim Hall. You know? So anyway, that's the book we're going to be reading next month.
Now, I always tell Bill,
Did everybody get one?
Let's present this and see if this is what they want to do. Let's at least let's at least pretend like they have some say in this. So I really do. I mean, I have not read the book yet. I've not even read the chapter. I've listened to maybe 2 of his podcasts.
Another question, where is Arimathea? Joseph's supposed to be from Arimathea. Where is that?
You got your Bible atlas.
There's no Arimathea. And he just...
Wait, hold on. Is this like there was no Pontius Pilate until
Yeah,
50 years ago when they turned over a stone?
I mean, I think evangelicals will agree. There's no Arimathea.
Well, remember he's right, that's the case that was made about Pontius Pilate. He was a fictional character that didn't exist until they found the inscription at Caesarea Maritima.
What do you think, Chris?
I was going to say, I actually looked on the almighty Wikipedia, Arimathea, and apparently, like, you can transliterate it, and in Aramaic it's one thing, in Greek it sounds very similar to another town, which Eusebius attributes it to. Take that for what you will. I know Carrier says it was made up because it's a play on words in some fashion, but I don't know if there's a town that is called Arimathea, but apparently it is believed to refer to a town that's similar sounding. I don't know.
Do we even know that it was supposed to be a town and not his father?
Yeah, we're making lots of assumptions.
What does Arimathea translate to? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way...
It's Aramaic, though. It's not Greek, so I couldn't even help you.
By the way, Bart Ehrman used to believe in an empty tomb. This is even when he became an agnostic and a critical scholar. Now, after reading all the evidence on every source, there was no proper burial for a person convicted of sedition against the state. He was probably, as John Dominic Cross, one of the great experts in Christianity, says, most likely he was just thrown to a common grave and eaten by the dogs where he was barely recognizable a few days
So
after.
the tomb was just a later invention to try to...
That's their
to
exact
try to
words.
fulfill the prophecy in Psalms that his grave would be amongst the rich or something.
Right,
like that.
right. Which is a great, and that's the thing. If there wasn't Joseph of Arimathea, man, that's a remarkable prophecy because Jesus didn't have control where he was going to be buried. So it says in Isaiah, rich he would be buried.
That's right, Isaiah, not Psalm.
Yeah, and but that's the question. Like you're saying, how do we know? We didn't. This is stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The disciples of Jesus were illiterate fishermen. They couldn't even. 95% of the population couldn't read or write.
But remember, we talked about that today,
well,
Bill.
let me make my case.
Go ahead, sorry.
The Gospels, written 30 years later, these are written by highly trained Greek-speaking Christians that were proficient in Greek literary technique. So there's no way they could have been written by these illiterate fishermen.
Right.
So
Maybe address that though. Let me just address that one point. First of all, if you take Greek and read John's Gospel, you're
I'm
not
gonna
going
pull
to
the Greek card on me, please.
Well, no, it's not complicated Greek. This is where first semester Greek you start with John. It's the simplest. It's the most
Koinonia.
profound. Well, all of it's Koine Greek, but
Just
you try to
common.
read. You try to read Second Peter, and then, you're going to struggle. For John, First John and John is you can tell it's the same author. The structure, the words, very simple vocabulary, very deep theology, very basic. Baby Greek they call it, baby Greek. Now the second thing is, conservative scholars, most of them place all four Gospels being written before 70, and the reason why
They
is
don't.
yeah, the conservatives ones do.
Well, conservatives, of course.
But one of the big tells on that is that there's no mention of the destruction of Jerusalem, and it would be like writing a book about
But then again, conservatives are not inclined to see a prophecy of referencing the destruction of the temple as, referencing the destruction. They want to see it as a prophecy.
Yeah, I mean
there
that's
might be somebody at the door.
That's
By the
somebody-
way, the consensus is Mark in the 70s, Luke and Matthew in the 80s, and John about 90s.
That's the common view.
The common
Yeah.
consensus.
You know,
But I will say this, but one of the reasons that you do have the Gospels.
What?
20 miles northwest of Jerusalem.
Is there a Matthew?
Yeah, that's what one of the scholars said.
One of the reasons that the Gospels may have been written later is it takes some time for a fisherman to become proficient in Greek. And you say, well, how can these, this tax collector and this fisherman and all that, they're country bumpkins, how can they write this kind of stuff? Well, first of all, John's Gospel is very simple Greek. But the second thing is, if you read the things that I wrote when I was a freshman in college, when I was 21 years old, you would not recognize it. You would say, this is not the same author that writes something today. But it took me a lot of work and, a lot of, 30 years to get to where I am now. Not that I'm where I want to be, but you're seeing the development later of these fishermen that are much more than that by the time they write the Gospels.
But the idea that they had to be written before 70 because they don't mention the destruction of the temple, isn't that kind of the letters to your mother kind of thing, where you're writing a biography of Jesus? That has nothing to do with the destruction of the temple. There's no need to mention it. How do you mention
There
it?
would have been a reason, because you're trying to make the case that the temple is obsolete and that the sacrifice that's made on Yom Kippur that's done every year at the temple has already been fulfilled. If you could point to that and say, see, this is why the temple's no longer there. This is why the temple's destroyed, because the Lamb of God has already paid the final sacrifice.
But if you're writing after 70 to Jews, they know the temple's been destroyed. Like in the mother scenario, you don't need to mention this
No,
is because
okay, that's a
that
good
the temple
point.
was destroyed, as if they don't already
No,
know.
that's a good point. It was common knowledge, so you don't have to refer to it.
But I think that's not the only reason. That's not the only thing that makes us think that they're early. Like, for example, you have Acts is telling the story of Paul, and then abruptly ends. It doesn't include his death. So that would lead us to believe that it was prior to his death. We know that he died in like 62 A.D. You take it a step back further. That's Luke's second book. Now we know that Mark is the first one. So now we have an early Mark, we have an early Luke. The dominoes begin to fall.
Unless you argue that there's an older ending of Acts that no one's ever seen or heard of, it ends abruptly, right in mid-sentence almost, with Paul awaiting trial. This is the whole Acts of the Apostles, and they never finish the story. Our belief is because it hadn't happened yet. So if Luke wrote Acts, he writes Luke first, then he writes Acts second. That means that had to be written before 64.
James, David Fitzgerald said that was 100 A.D. He just ripped off Josephus, so it must be true, right?
Well, even if he's right, even if Paul, let's say Paul hadn't died yet, that's still no excuse to stop a narrative mid-sentence. You can still have a tidy ending to a book about a guy that's still alive. You don't just he's still alive, I guess we'll just stop here. You can tie up your loose ends.
Well, Bart Ehrman believes Acts was written in 85 AD, and he's kind of the expert. Anyway, so did you find any, any compelling? I mean, he gave out some good, compelling evidence. What do you think? Do you
That's
find
a
any
good one for somebody who's not even
and that
had these
includes
discussions
someone I
and
hear
talked
you
about
do.
it. So you see it for the first time. You think, are they just?
Did he blow you away, or?
This guy?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
But you didn't find anything the skeptics?
How about Bart
because-
Ehrman? Was anything compelling of his?
Well, it's like anything we do. It's like politics or anything. You gravitate toward what you want to believe initially anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to that, and actually, after we hung up on the phone, I was listening to that, feeding my dogs, realizing I had to get dressed, and carrying my phone around, as I was walking around, and certain things that he would say, because I obviously don't believe that, the resurrection story. I was, putting on my mascara going, well, let me wonder why this didn't happen.
But you're right.
So
It resonates what you want to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
So I heard what supported what I already believed, and that's kind of one of the reasons that I was interested in coming here, is because you wonder why you believe what you believe, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm listening to these stories from you, and that you were saying, and trying to process in my mind how your belief is so different than mine, or what changed in our thought process that makes one person believe something else. When you were talking earlier about, and I'll quit talking in just a second. When you were talking earlier about Jim Jones and all of that, just this last weekend, I watched a deal on Charles Manson. Those girls believed that he was God.
Yeah.
They believed that he was Jesus, and they murdered for him.
Yeah.
And some of them were young, messed up girls on drugs.
They were drug addicts.
Some of them were from really nice homes and just wanted to get away. So I see how people follow. You get trapped in something.
Yes. Some of them are still believers. all these
Yes,
years later.
absolutely. So-
That's why I take the skeptical position that I do, like towards anything. Like even though I don't believe that there is a God,
And please understand, I don't mean any disrespect about this at all, but I think people tell different stories. I think people tell different stories for what okay, in Hinduism, Shiva came in, he saw his wife with what he thought was her lover. It was actually his son, Ganesh. He chopped off his head. His wife said, "Oh, you've killed our son." He ran outside, chopped off the head of an elephant and stuck it on his son, and that's Ganesh. And
Wow, talk about miracles.
exactly, and trust me, I've taken yoga, and the elephant was the first living creature that he found. There are chants to Ganesh because of his place in the Hindu, deity.
Conrad, does it bother you that Mark, our earliest and unvarnished gospel, our bare bones, most believable gospel, because remember it says the women came to the tomb, and they told nobody, okay? Sounds kind of credible, right? How come he doesn't have any post-resurrection appearances? Why doesn't Mark record any?
Yeah, I don't know.
Doesn't it bother you? Because John has the fish fry at the Sea of Tiberias, where he's having a big fish fry with the disciples.
John actually is what bothers me.
Well, it bothers lots of scholars.
I'm a
It's
lot
funny when-
easier. I'm a lot better with the synoptic.
Oh, you mean like Thomas? Hey, just touch my,
I mean, I just think that you got the synoptic gospels, and then John just kind of half here and left.
Well, you're absolutely right. But
You know.
obviously, these post-resurrection appearances were invented later. Just to, like the fish fry at the Sea of Tiberias, where he's saying, "Hey, have some fish," and so forth. I'm eating fish. You're just showing that Jesus has a corporal body, not like those that just believe that he was just a spirit. So
Yeah, but
that's when.
That doesn't really bother me, though. I mean, Mark may be a fragmentary narrative.
Don't you think that's kind of important?
But it's the earliest
resurrection
narrative.
Appearances?
Do what?
All the others are built off of Mark. That's the earliest one, and it ends with
And he
the
doesn't mention-
it ends with the women
That-
running from the tomb and not telling anybody.
Met with
Well,
all these
it doesn't say, and the women told no one.
Yeah, I think it does.
Doesn't report that what happened afterwards.
I think it does say they
I
told
mean, you
no
raise a
one.
good point.
Well, you know
No,
the
it does not. bother me personally, but I do take your point though.
Yeah, it's very problematic, because that's kind of important to validate, Jesus' resurrection.
I think
Oh, and by the way, like Bart Ehrman says, did he tell the disciples, like in Matthew, to stay in Galilee or in the other gospel where they're supposed to go to Jerusalem? You can't even get that straight, Oh, and the most telling one, in the end of Matthew, the disciples are looking at the resurrected Jesus. The resurrected Jesus. They're followers. You know what it says? Some doubt it. Well, if you're there and you doubt, how in the world are we supposed to believe 2,000 years later?
Why did they say that? Why is that in the story?
I was William Dembski, a professor at Southwestern. I was in his class. He couldn't find it. He asked the people in the class, and they couldn't figure it. He goes, I don't know.
Well, it's
And how
not
many
something that
people
happens
were
every
there?
day, so I mean maybe you question your own eyesight.
How large was the crowd though?
I think it was his disciples and so
Okay.
yeah.
So it wasn't like it was a stadium full and
No,
something.
no.
Okay.
But you see my point. We're asked to believe like.
I think I would find myself doubting. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Because
think I
you-
find myself doubting now. I mean, I believe.
It's so shocking
but
that
then-
you
then
couldn't believe your
there's-
eyes.
But if it happened in this room, if it happened in this room right now, there'd be 14 number one bestsellers within a month, all written by each of us, and they would corroborate
Yeah.
way better than that.
But yeah, but if we disagree, then it means that we didn't exist. So.
I mean, ask any cop if
You're saying that
gets the same story.
sarcastically, right? Because that's my argument. Okay, all right. I'm not easy.
I'm here for you, Jeff.
Let me address some of what you said here. You have within Christianity, there's a big debate. Are the Gospels and the New Testament? Is it no contradictions at all? Is it plenary inspiration, inerrant? Every alphabet letter is exactly right in the original autograph, or are there embellishments or changes, or somebody gets a fact wrong here and there? That's a debate amongst Christians. That's not what they're talking about. The question is a minimal facts case. So what you have is all the Gospels agree, plus Paul, plus the early church fathers. There's an agreement that Jesus was crucified, that he died and rose again. So it's just like if you saw the automobile accident. I'll use your example. You were kicked out of a church for asking embarrassing questions, and you said if I was to go back there today, there were 20 people in the class, I'll probably get 20 explanations of what happened that day. And I said, see, you never were kicked out of the church, were you? Because they all disagree with each other. But they would agree on the minimal facts. He was there, he said something that the people didn't like, he was asked to leave. So you go back and look at that. When you look at the minimal facts, it's a whole different question. Are there contradictions in the Gospels? That's a whole different question. What do they all agree on? And the agreement that you have goes to one of those 4 facts that Bill Craig's talking about, that his disciples sincerely thought that he had been raised from the dead.
According
now
to
that they reported that. Now it could be, was it a conspiracy, a better explanation, that they got together and concocted a plan? Or was it better to say there was a mass hallucination, they were doing acid? There's other explanations for those facts, but that's a generally agreed upon fact that there were disciples of his that really sincerely reported that he'd come back from the dead.
Here's the problem. The contradictions in the Gospels are so egregious. In Mark, you have the women discovering the empty tomb, they tell nobody, burial. Matthew has a Roman guard, a whole Roman guard guarding the tomb. He has an earthquake that splits stones. Wouldn't that be kind of an important thing to put in your account? And not only there, this guy doesn't even know when to stop. He has the dead saint zombies coming out of the graves. That's something you might want to record. Going to witness in the city of Jerusalem, and then it's 9 o'clock. I'd love to stay, guys, but I got to get back to the tomb. It's so insane. Isn't that problematic?
Secular history would have recorded that. You can be sure.
Yeah. Even the Christians. One of the Christians that he was at Southern University, Mike Licona, and he goes, I don't know if that dead zombie thing is right. It probably is just apocalyptic thought. And his professor went, glad to hear you say that. You're gone. And they fired him. He's now teaching in Houston.
Yeah, think of it this way too. Like, let's say next meeting, Jim, Sam, and I come rushing in and say, James, we just saw a Sasquatch outside. But Jim says he was wearing a basketball uniform and eating sheet cake. And Sam says he was wearing a ballerina outfit and eating tacos. And I say he was wearing a cowboy outfit and eating Hershey Kisses. Are you going to think we saw a Sasquatch at all?
Ooh, that's a good point, Chris.
I would try to harmonize that and say there were probably 3 Sasquatches out there. No, that's a good point.
Speaking of multiple Jesuses,
Who the person is, the purpose that they're writing. Let me give you an example.
Yeah, I would not believe Jim, I'd believe the other 2.
wow.
Last week, one of my former students at Southwestern, he wrote a long article on how he was abused at Southwestern, they hated him, he didn't get anything from the experience, etc. And then 2 days ago, he posted on my Facebook that, I was his best professor ever, I prepared him for Princeton where he's thrived, etc. So which one of those stories is correct?
The one that makes you look best.
But if you ask him,
That's
he would
the
say
best
both of them,
explanation
right?
of the Bible.
Because he's telling 2 different stories. One story he's telling about his bigger overall
Right,
experience.
exactly.
The other he's talking about a particular
It's not a
time frame.
contradiction.
And so you can't expect them to be telling all the same story because they're different authors. Even if they were the same author telling it at 2 different times, the story's going to be different because of the
But
author.
like in Mark, the stone is already removed. Okay, when the women get there. In Matthew, but the stone's still there. It's removed by this, crazy angel or whatever afterwards. That's a core thing. If you're talking about the most important event in history, you've got to get some of the core facts straight, don't you agree?
Well, it goes back to what James was saying though, because he said it in passing, but that's really important is how you do harmonization. How much harmonization, is required? Do you do moderate harmonization? Do you have to harmonize everything? Or do you understand that some things we don't just have all the information on? And they, may very well have happened a particular way, but we don't have all the details.
And by the way, it gets worse. In the Gospel of Peter, you got Jesus, our only account of Jesus actually going from the tomb, resurrecting from the tomb. He comes out of the tomb, he goes up to the clouds, he has 2 people beside him, and a talking cross in the background.
And he's 900 feet tall.
Yeah.
Did you say the Gospel of Peter?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a reason
Does
they didn't
anyone
make the canon.
in the early church take the Gospel of Peter as?
Well, in that clip,
there were people who did.
in that clip,
That's
if you
why
remember,
that's why it exists. There were people who did.
Craig uses the Gospel of Peter as one of his evidences, but then
Yeah,
he dismisses the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus has a twin brother. So you pick and choose which one fits your narrative, and you dismiss the rest.
And by the way, the Gospel of Thomas, which could be really early, it's debatable, no birth narrative, no passion narrative, just 100 sayings of Jesus. And clearly, the birth narrative, with its wildly contradictory thing, is fiction. Everybody knows that in scholarship. And
one of the sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas is that women are not worthy of the kingdom of heaven and must be turned into men first.
well, that is certainly come from God.
Hey, hold on. By the way, you gotta understand though what that's really saying. Like, Jesus even talks about this in the New Testament. In heaven, there is no male and female. No one is given in marriage. No one is taken in marriage. There is no birth. It's the end of the reproductive system. It's the end of the life and death system. That is the eternal life above and beyond this reality that is being falsely promised.
Those are not even close to the same things, though. Saying that a woman has to turn into a man, and then saying that there will be no gender or marriage.
That's what it's referring
Well,
to.
Timothy and Titus say that a woman needs to keep her mouth shut in church.
There is no male and
another
female.
inspired saying, by the way.
That's what it's referring to.
And one of the problems here is so Bill, you'll ask a question and then get an answer, and then you'll immediately go to another question without even responding to if you think that was a good answer or anything.
He just wants to open it up to everybody.
Which I think is perfectly fine. It's just we're like shotgun, and not actually closing any of our current conversations. and we're kind of equivocating a lot. Like,
Oh yeah.
we're going away from the point of some of the arguments. Like, we talked about how, well, lots of people believe wrong things, right? You know, Joseph Smith, I don't believe Joseph Smith was a prophet at all. I've done a lot of studying, and I don't believe he was right. The point isn't that that the disciples believed this, and so it was right. The point is, in that argument, for the 4 facts, that they genuinely, legitimately believed it, and that's why they were ready to die for it. Not that they believed it, so now everybody has to believe it because if
But
they did.
people do give up their lies for falsehoods. Again,
100%.
Jim Jones, that we already
Absolutely.
covered.
By the way,
Not the
Bart
I would
Ehrman,
agree with you on that.
Bart
It's
Ehrman
not.
says in this debate, there's no evidence that any of the disciples died for their faith.
That's
a
very
lie.
false.
Really?
Very false.
We
Uh,
got
Like
video
Thomas,
here.
being drugged through the streets
no,
of India.
listen. Sean McDowell.
Oh, he's not biased. His dad's Josh McDowell.
I believe y'all have read
Read
his
one of his
book.
books.
He
Yeah.
did his doctorate studies. He did really in-depth
That was his
study.
dissertation.
Yeah, his dissertation to find, because people always use that as an argument. Well, didn't all the disciples die for it? So doesn't that make it true? No, it doesn't make it true, first of all. But when he did his in-depth studies, he found that we have very, very, very good historical evidence that 4 of them did die. Pretty good evidence that 1 of them died, and then the rest, specifically for this. I mean, all of them died, specifically for this reason, and then the rest we just don't know. Eventually, church
Peter,
history
the
said.
tradition, the legends that he died upside down, we don't have any hard evidence.
No,
We
there's
just have-
no. That's just tradition.
irrelevant.
That's irrelevant.
Where's the evidence for the other disciples?
Yeah, is it
That's
extra
irrelevant
biblical?
to the point though? See, that's my
we
problem.
have pretty good evidence that Paul was.
And
Yeah,
that's
Paul
that's extra biblical
was
evidence, right?
Yes.
Well, because of
Of
actions before he's killed, right?
Yeah, we know.
It's
we don't have-
contemporary. It's extra
Yes.
biblical.
Yeah.
I have Indian
We have
friends from
none.
South India who are persuaded that Thomas's grave is there in South India, and they know how he was killed and why he was killed.
That's
That's why there are so many Christians in that part of India.
Isn't there like one disciple has a tomb in Japan or something like that?
Not Japan, maybe in one of the false gospels.
Well, I was gonna,
Yeah, there are
I
people
mentioned
who
this
believe false
a
things.
couple of months ago, but I'll bring it up again. Is one of the kind of frustrating things for me is I'm not sure what exactly that you want, because if we allow that Mark's the first and Mark's the bare bones and doesn't have any elaboration on anything, just the bare facts like a Twitter feed, and then you have Luke's gospel and you have John's gospel, you have these other gospels, they have additional information. So if it's different, then it's obviously embellishment, it's obviously, but Bill would say, obviously something that was added to the story later. Okay, so then okay, well, what about when it matches? Well, it's plagiarism. It's just copy and paste.
Yeah, but James,
It's like, okay, how do you
James,
avoid it?
that would be right, except for Mark. The most important part is the part that's omitted.
The resurrection?
The appearance, the post-resurrection appearance.
Well, he still has the resurrection though.
Yeah, that's
No, Mark stops at the empty tomb. We never see Jesus.
But he's saying it's implied he's resurrected.
raised
It
from
says
the
it's
dead.
empty.
Okay, yeah, okay, I give you that.
But yeah, I would wish that if it was up to me, I would say go back and add in the post
Okay,
resurrection.
yeah, that sounds right.
A lot of people think the shorter ending of Mark, which is the authentic ending of Mark, it stops at his crucifixion and there's no empty tomb. So I just want to make sure that even the shortest ending of Mark that we have does have an empty tomb on it. Yeah.
Mhm.
For those 4 things though, rather than the resurrection as the best explanation of those facts, I think taking a minimalist approach, the best explanation is people writing books.
There wasn't a lot of book publishing in those days.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
They wrote
scrolls.
books. Those scrolls, that's what they're
There
writing.
wasn't a big market. for
People
those.
writing.
You didn't do it for money.
Because of the illiteracy?
It's not the same. Like a lot of the arguments
It's so
here
simple,
are
it's
like
obvious.
in our
It would be.
American current
Yeah, that-
culture.
that's the
this
simplest
wouldn't convince
explanation,
me,
people
or in our
writing.
current American culture, this wouldn't fly. But this was not written in modern day America. It was written thousands of years ago.
What would happen though?
I'm just. You're thinking I'm saying way more than I am. Just very simple. The simplest explanation is people writing books.
Or are you saying pro,
Why did they
pro
write
the
them?
resurrection or
No,
against the resurrection?
no, it's just the simplest explanation.
That brings up the question, why did Mark write it down? When did he write it down? And who did he write it for?
Can't be known.
Oh, by the way, one of the great explanations, because here's what the Christian apologists do. Oh my gosh, they don't have mass hallucinations, so it's not a hallucination. Boy, we got that one. Oh, the Christ coming, he wasn't really dead in the tomb. He comes out and he just, nobody would believe that. Oh, we got that one. So what they do is they go, oh, so we defeated all these, so it must be true. And what Bart Ehrman says in the video is, hey, well, maybe he had a twin brother, and he got crucified. So he goes,
Not double.
what you're implying is the least likely thing, a miracle
Actually,
happens.
that
Someone
is
rose
the
from the dead.
Muslim explanation.
The Book of
there's
Thomas.
a bigger question that comes before those questions.
Didymus Thomas. Didymus means
I think
twin.
the bigger question is, why were those objections ever put forth by non-believers?
Because we want to, but here's what Gerd Ludemann, who he mentioned, says, which is very plausible. These are the best explanations for why the resurrection didn't happen. Peter, when someone dies, and people go through grief, we know this, they see appearances of dead husbands or close relatives or whatever because they're in grief. So you would think Peter, who denied him 6 times, depending on which gospel you read, would be just totally, grieving and disillusioned. And it's plausible to think he might have seen or thought he saw the risen Jesus. He tells someone else tells someone, and pretty soon, people just start to believe it. The other explanation is the wrong tomb. They simply put Jesus in a tomb, and when the disciples came, they went to the wrong tomb. But the thing Bart Ehrman says, and this is from Hume's thing on miracles, that you always believe the most probable explanation. The least likely explanation is that a miracle would happen, which we know does not happen.
Why not?
In our naturalist,
Because we
I'm
just,
not saying
in our physical,
It wouldn't be
naturalist
called a miracle.
perspective,
yeah.
If
dead
it was
people
the-
always stay dead.
It has to be the least
I've
probable
never
explanation.
I'm just
Or it
saying
wouldn't be a
that-
miracle.
We're not saying there could be an exception. We
In
don't
our
have an
paradigm,
anti-super-
as
We'll talk
scientists,
about that after.
scientism, naturalism, our paradigm is dead people always stay dead.
And we're open, as atheists, some of us are open to the supernatural.
How many?
So-
What percentage would
What?
it be?
A few, I mean, but just give me
Only
like
inconsistent
Bart
ones.
says, Give me, first of all, give me disinterested evidence. These gospel writers had a theological axe to grind, and that is, I want critical opinion,
Hard to
critical
find
reviews.
eyewitnesses who were non-believers.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
It is.
Because one of your arguments is that if this happened, everybody would have to believe it. There's no way they could be disingenuous.
no,
But then
that's
at
all
the
right.
same time, you're like, well, but we really want disinterested people. to
It would be
believe
nice.
We have it with
It'd be
Caesar,
better.
of course. See, that's why,
But
that's
that's
more credible.
that's not my point. My point is that you're asking for both, and they're contradictory things that you're asking.
You get to pick only one of the two.
Yeah, my point.
You know, the
isn't
atheist
that
finds
you're wrong
extraordinary,
or right.
extraordinary claims need extraordinary
I
evidence.
completely agree.
You know, these
We would like
criterion
to see extraordinary evidence, but let me say, if we had zero evidence, it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
True.
these criterion
You
are
do
not
it.
so ridiculous when we're talking about mathematics or engineering or science or building a computer.
What do you think of his mathematical formula for?
The Bayes theorem.
Oh,
Uh,
do
Well, you
see
could
that?
plug in,
No, but
yeah,
what-
just like
my point
Ehrman
is
said,
when
you
we're
could plug
talking
in
about
get
facts,
any
it-
god you wanted out of it.
It doesn't matter the language, the culture, the race, ethnicity, the background. Mathematics is true in India, China, Africa, South America, Antarctica even. You know?
Let me tell you how crazy Bayes' theorem is. Swinburne, who's a Christian apologist, did the Bayesian analysis on the
0.97.
resurrection, 97% or whatever.
Yeah,
Richard
0.97.
Carrier uses his Bayesian analysis and comes up with 0.3%. So that doesn't get us very far, you know?
kind of like climate change models.
Yeah.
Well, the five of us.
But yet, an Indian can use a cell phone, a British person can use a cell phone, an Italian can use a cell phone. That works. Doesn't matter what you believe about it. Heck, you can believe reality is an illusion, yet you can still call someone in the U.S.
Getting back to the debate, the point that Craig makes is that the God raising Jesus from the dead is the best explanation for the evidence that we have. Just to get a feel for the room, do you think there's any naturalistic explanations that are possible for the evidence that we have? For this
Yeah, I
story?
mean, anything's possible. It could be the aliens or something. I mean, that's a
That's the
possibility.
best.
Aliens came and beamed up the body from the grave.
And we just don't understand those aliens right
Or the
now.
technology
Perhaps
they
those
have.
aliens are.
I think for me, it's more kind of going the opposite direction, saying let's look at all these other, and Bill mentioned like, oh, the wrong
Swoon
tomb.
theory, yeah.
Yeah, I mean swoon theory. Okay, let's go beat you 39 times and hang you to a
Yeah.
cross for a couple hours and see if you can.
Like,
The wrong tomb. I mean, that just seems ridiculous to me.
An unholy thing. An unholy thing.